As Seth Rollins begins physical therapy, Roman Reigns breaks his silence on his rival's devastating injury. WWE fans, brace yourselves, Seth Rollins is officially out of SummerSlam 2025 due to a severe knee injury that required surgery. But what does the tribal chief Roman Reigns think about it? In this emotional update, we reveal Roman's raw reaction and the latest behind-the-scenes updates on Seth's road to recovery. Expect exclusive commentary, medical insights on Seth Rollins' rehab journey, and what this means for WWE's main event scene moving forward. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more breaking WWE stories and updates. What happens when the man who was once invincible suddenly falls? What does it mean when the heartbeat of Monday Night Raw, its champion, its voice, its architect, is silenced not by betrayal, not by storyline, but by injury? That's the quiet, heartbreaking reality now facing Seth Rollins. And somewhere in the shadows, watching from a distance, is a man who knows exactly what that fall feels like. Roman Reigns. Tonight, we take you deep inside the aftermath of Seth Rollins' devastating knee injury, his surgery, his early steps into physical therapy, the toll on his body and spirit, and the response from the one man no one expected to speak at all. The tribal chief himself. Roman Reigns. A man whose silence had been deafening for months, until now. This is not just a wrestling story. It's a story about pain. About legacy. About fractured relationships and the strange ways they find their way back to each other through shared vulnerability. It's also about time, what it steals, what it reveals, and what it sometimes forces you to say before it's too late. Rollins' injury was not just another bump in the road. This wasn't a bruised rib or a storyline suspension. This was a complete rupture, literal and symbolic. A torn ligament. A career paused. A SummerSlam main event wiped clean from the calendar. And it didn't just change the card. It changed the locker room. It changed the energy. And for one man in particular, it stirred something long buried. The moment the news broke, Seth Rollins to miss SummerSlam 2025 due to severe knee injury, there was a shift. Not just among fans. But backstage. In production trucks. In quiet hallways where old wounds still linger. Because no matter how far they've drifted, no matter how many belts they've carried or matches they've headlined separately, there's still a bond between Rollins and Reigns. One forged in war. In trust. In betrayal. And in something most people forget, mutual respect. But before we get to Roman's reaction, we have to go back to that night. The night it happened. Sources inside WWE have confirmed that during a non-televised main event taping, Rollins landed awkwardly on his right leg after executing a Falcon Arrow. At first, he brushed it off. He even finished the segment. But the moment he exited gorilla position, those close to him say he collapsed backstage. Trainers rushed. Medical personnel cleared the area. Rollins reportedly clenched his jaw, refusing to scream in front of anyone. But the pain was immediate. And it was real. The MRI the next morning confirmed the worst, a fractured patella and a torn ACL. Emergency surgery was scheduled within 48 hours. And with that, the plans for SummerSlam were rewritten in a single breath. The championship match was off. The build-up gone. The show without its architect. Rollins' camp initially stayed quiet. There was no emotional Instagram post. No press conference. No behind-the-scenes documentary, yet. Just silence. Until the day after his surgery, when a grainy photo appeared. Seth in a hospital bed, eyes tired, but hand raised. A peace sign. A smile, if you could call it that. But what fans didn't see was the note attached to the side of the bed. 6 to 9 months. Best case. Rollins had built his entire identity around resilience. He was the Iron Man of WWE. The workhorse. The champion who kept pushing even when everyone else paused. And now, he couldn't walk without crutches. It's here, in this quiet, vulnerable chapter of Rollins' career, that an unexpected name re-emerged. Roman Reigns. According to multiple insiders, Roman had been monitoring the situation closely, even as he remained publicly distant from WWE affairs. One production member claimed that the moment the injury report came through internally, Roman's response was immediate. Not public. Not performative. But personal. A message. Delivered privately. The content of the message has not been revealed in full. But what we've been able to confirm is this: it was brief, honest, and emotional. Saw the footage. That's not how it should have gone. Heal up, brother. It was signed simply, Yus. Those close to Roman say this message was not easy to send. It came after hours of deliberation. He reportedly wrote it, deleted it, rewrote it. Not because of pride, but because of history. The weight between them. The fractured brotherhood. The shield. The bloodline. All of it. But in that moment, Roman wasn't the head of the table. He was a man watching another warrior fall, and remembering what that fall felt like. Back in 2018, when Roman Reigns stepped into the ring and announced to the world that his leukemia had returned, it was Seth who stood frozen beside him. Who looked like a man seeing his brother crumble in real time. Now the roles were reversed. And Roman was the one who had to reach out. The moment that message was sent, something shifted in Seth. A member of his inner circle shared that he read it twice, then again. Then put his phone down and sat quietly for nearly 10 minutes. Not a word. Just silence. He never expected Roman to say anything, the friend shared. Not after everything. Not after the bloodline wars. Not after the titles, the digs, the rivalry. But that message, it meant something. More than he realized. The bond between Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns has always defied explanation. They were brothers before the spotlight. Rivals in the spotlight. Ghosts to each other when things went dark. And yet, neither ever truly stopped watching the other. While Seth began his first sessions of physical therapy in Florida, a mix of aquatic training and light resistance work, Roman reportedly made a rare call to WWE's medical team. Not for public relations. But for information. Updates. Timetables. What the rehab looked like. What the recovery odds were. When asked why he wanted the details, Roman was said to have replied, "Because I know what it's like to come back when the world's watching. And I want him ready." Ready for what? That remains the question. There are some within WWE who believe Roman's sudden interest in Seth's recovery isn't just personal. It's foreshadowing. That once Rollins is cleared, perhaps in early 2026, the final chapter between them might be written. Not out of hate. But out of legacy. The final Shield collision. One last battle. One last test. But others close to Roman say it's not about storylines at all. He's been through it. The chemo. The weakness. The doubt. And he sees Seth now walking that same line, not an illness, but an identity, one source revealed. When you're injured like that, you lose something. Not just physically. Spiritually. And Roman understands that. The public doesn't know all of this. Most fans only see the headlines. Rollins injured. Out of SummerSlam. Roman Reigns spotted at PC. But behind the curtain, something very human is unfolding. A slow reweaving of two careers once torn apart by ambition, fame, and pain. Meanwhile, inside Rollins' recovery center, the work has begun. Early footage, not yet released to the public, shows him grimacing as he bends his knee, inch by inch. The pain is obvious. The grit is clearer. His trainer reportedly told a WWE crew member, he doesn't talk much during the sessions. But when he does, it's always the same question: how soon can I run? It's a question that echoes not just urgency, but fear. The fear of being forgotten. The fear of returning and not being the same. The fear of seeing someone else take your place. And maybe, deep down, that's what Roman's message really meant. Not heal up. But, I remember who you are. Because despite the world framing their feud in promos and punchlines, there was always something deeper there. A silent recognition. Roman may be the tribal chief. Seth may be the visionary. But once, long ago, they were just two hungry kids riding in rental cars, dreaming of gold and greatness. Before betrayal. Before titles. Before bloodlines and booze. The WWE Universe has always loved the spectacle. But what they're witnessing now is something else entirely. Not a heel turn. Not a face pop. But two men growing older in a business that rarely allows for reflection. For Roman, this isn't about SummerSlam. It's about a message sent in a moment of truth. For Seth, it's about walking again. Running again. Being seen not as the man who missed the biggest event of the summer, but as the one who came back stronger. The road ahead is long. Physical therapy will stretch for months. Seth's knee, we're told, is responding well, but progress is slow. He's had to relearn basic movements. He's had to rely on others. He's had to listen more and speak less. And in all of this, he's had to feel the weight of something he never planned for, stillness. But in that stillness, something else is forming. Possibility. A return. A reckoning. Maybe even, reconciliation. Because for the first time in years, Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins are not standing across from each other. They're standing beside the same fight. And that fight is time. In the weeks following his initial therapy sessions, Seth Rollins began to understand something that every injured athlete eventually confronts. The hardest battles aren't waged in rings or arenas, but in the mind. The pain in his knee was sharp, yes, searing at times, but it was the silence that hurt the most. The silence between days. The silence when the crowd isn't cheering, when the pyro isn't exploding, when your name isn't trending. For a man who had spent nearly 2 decades feeding off energy, pacing locker rooms, planning entrances, scripting chaos in the ring, this new life, confined to slow stretches and quiet progress, felt like suffocation. His world had become small. No ropes. No cameras. Just a narrow gym, a padded mat, a mirror, and his own reflection staring back at him, asking if he still believed he was the same man who once carried WWE on his shoulders. But it was in that silence that echoes from the past began to return. Roman Reigns, once a brother, then a rival, and now, something else, had entered his thoughts more than Seth cared to admit. Not because he wanted closure. Not because he wanted revenge. But because that message, short and simple as it was, had cracked something open. That message didn't come from a faction leader or a champion. It came from a man who had faced his own mortality and walked out the other side. And now, Seth couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, Roman saw something in him that he no longer saw in himself. Sources close to Rollins revealed that in the weeks after surgery, he began rewatching old matches, not just to study technique or visualize a comeback, but to remember. The old clips from NXT. The first Shield entrance through the crowd. The night they held all the gold. The night it all fell apart. There was one clip in particular he returned to. A backstage interview from 2014. All 3 men, freshly arrived, arms crossed, cocky smiles, hunger in their eyes. The chemistry undeniable. The future unfolding in real time. Watching it now, Rollins saw more than swagger. He saw innocence. Hope. Brotherhood. And loss. He turned off the screen before the interviewer even finished asking the first question. The injury had done more than derail a match. It had resurrected a timeline Seth thought he had buried. Because the truth was, despite the personas, despite the rivalries, there had always been unfinished business. The Shield had never truly ended. It had just fractured and scattered. And in that moment of personal weakness, Seth began to feel something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. He missed them. Not just Roman. Not just Dean. All of it. The family that wasn't built by blood, but by battle. Meanwhile, in Florida, Roman Reigns was walking a different path. Quiet, measured, purposeful. His public appearances remained sparse. No matches scheduled. No open declarations. But those inside the WWE Performance Center started to notice something unusual. Roman had begun showing up unannounced. Not to train. Not to cut promos. Just to sit. To watch. He would stand in the back of the training room, arms folded, sunglasses on, and observe. New recruits, seasoned veterans, guest coaches, everyone felt the shift when he entered. He didn't speak much. But his presence spoke volumes. It was during one of these visits that he reportedly asked a performance center trainer to walk him through the exact rehabilitation process Rollins would undergo. The staffer, stunned, laid out the phases: post-surgical care, gradual weight-bearing, resistance training, hydrotherapy, and finally, functional movement drills. Roman listened intently. He asked questions. He nodded. And then, without a word, walked out. That same day, Roman sent another message. This one longer. Thoughtful. Direct. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even meant to be public. But what we know from sources close to both men is that this message was different. In it, Roman acknowledged the distance. The betrayals. The titles. The silence. But more importantly, he acknowledged the pain. He told Seth that recovery isn't just about getting stronger, it's about remembering who you were when everything was taken away. He closed the message with a single line that reportedly shook Rollins more than any promo ever could: "When you're ready to return, I'll be here. Not as the tribal chief. As your brother." Seth didn't reply immediately. He stared at the message for almost half an hour, the phone resting on the edge of a therapy table. His physical therapist, noticing the tears in his eyes, asked if he needed a break. He shook his head. "No," he said softly. "I need to finish this set." And he did. Every rep, every movement, every painful extension, without looking away from the screen. By now, news of Rollins' injury had rippled across the locker room. Superstars reached out. Becky Lynch, of course, never left his side. But there was something different about Roman's message. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't bravado. It was a hand extended, unsure if it would be taken. And somewhere, in the cracks of Seth's pride and pain, something softened. At home, Rollins' world was slower but not smaller. Becky kept things grounded, managing their daughter's routines, balancing her own WWE schedule, and quietly supporting Seth's recovery without ever making it about her. Friends came by, meals were dropped off, rehab schedules were taped to the refrigerator. And yet, the air inside their home felt heavy. Not from sorrow, but from possibility. Becky knew that Seth was thinking about more than just rehab. She could see it in the way he lingered at the window after PT. In the way he watched old matches with the volume low. In the way he spoke less, but felt more. She didn't push. She just reminded him, quietly, that whatever came next, he didn't have to face it alone. But Seth wasn't the only one processing change. Roman Reigns, now past the peak of his historic title reign, had entered what many close to him described as a reflective phase. He was no longer chasing greatness. He had become it. Now the question was what he would do with the power he had left. And more importantly, what kind of legacy he wanted to leave behind. That's why the messages mattered. That's why he reached out. Not for publicity. Not for a swerve. But because he understood something that only time and pain can teach a man. Power means nothing if you lose everyone you fought to protect. And Roman had lost a lot. Insiders confirm that Paul Heyman was not made aware of Roman's messages to Seth. This was personal. Unscripted. And yet, there were whispers among the creative team. Whispers that the two former Shield brothers might be closer to reconciliation than anyone imagined. Not in storyline. Not in kayfabe. But in something real. Back at the rehab center, Seth had started walking without crutches. Slowly. Carefully. Each step a reminder of the fragility of greatness. His therapist, watching him one morning, asked if he had a goal beyond recovery. Seth looked up, sweat clinging to his forehead, and said something he hadn't said out loud until that moment. I want to come back better. Not just in the ring. In here. He tapped his chest. I don't want to be the same guy that left. That night, he opened Roman's message again. This time, he replied. The full content remains private, but sources say it was simple. Direct. Emotional. He thanked Roman. Acknowledged the history. And told him something that, for all the years of war between them, had never been said plainly. I never stopped believing in you. Even when I hated you. And for Roman, reading that under the dim light of his private office, it meant everything. It didn't erase the past. It didn't undo the betrayals. But it cracked open a window. One that had been sealed shut since Dean walked out, since titles divided them, since pride took the place of peace. WWE has not made any official statement regarding a potential Shield reunion. But something is happening. Not in the ring. Not on the screen. But in the silence behind the curtain. In two men, once at war, now quietly finding their way back to something that was never truly destroyed. Just lost. Rollins' return timetable remains uncertain. Doctors are optimistic. Trainers are impressed. But Seth isn't rushing it. Not this time. He knows that when he comes back, the world will expect fireworks. A roar. A challenge. But he's thinking about something else entirely. Something slower. Deeper. Not a feud. A moment. One that doesn't need titles or betrayals. One that only needs a nod. A glance. A handshake. Or maybe, a silent embrace in the middle of the ring, under lights they once dreamed of, as brothers once again. Because sometimes, when the body is broken, the heart opens. And sometimes, when the knee gives out, something stronger stands up in its place. That's where this story stands now. Not in resolution. But in waiting. And perhaps, in healing. Somewhere between the long nights and early mornings, between the aching knees and the swirling memories, Seth Rollins began to understand that this injury wasn't a punishment, it was a reset. Not just for his career, but for his soul. Because for years, he had run fast. Faster than most. From match to match. City to city. Rival to rival. Always one step ahead of doubt, of fatigue, of the fear that he might one day not be enough. But now, grounded by steel rods and rehab routines, Seth was forced to sit with the very silence he had tried to outrun. And in that stillness, he finally began to see the fractures, not in his body, but in the relationships he had left unattended. He thought of Dean. Of their last conversation. Brief. Hollow. More formality than friendship. He thought of Roman. Of the way things had soured, publicly and privately, until the connection between them had become little more than an echo. And now, he thought of the people still around him, watching him learn how to walk again. Becky, steadfast. The fans, loyal. The ones he had trained with, who now visited with cautious optimism in their eyes, unsure of what version of Seth Rollins would emerge on the other side. But the most surprising thing? Roman kept checking in. Not every day. Not even every week. But enough. Just enough. A message here. A question there. Always direct. Never overbearing. It was almost as if Roman knew what he needed before Seth knew it himself. There was one morning, a particularly painful session, when Seth nearly fell during a balance drill. The pain shot through his thigh like lightning. He gritted his teeth, cursed under his breath, and slammed his hand against the therapy bench. The trainer offered a break. Seth refused. Later that day, a message buzzed on his phone. It was Roman. Fall as many times as you need to. Just don't forget who's watching when you get back up. No emojis. No fanfare. Just that. And Seth sat with it for hours. In Connecticut, the WWE creative team met behind closed doors to discuss the long-term trajectory of Rollins' absence. Title plans had shifted. New faces were being elevated. The SummerSlam spot that had once been etched in ink was now vacant. But amidst the chaos, one name kept resurfacing. Reigns. Not because of title implications, his historic run had ended months prior, but because of timing. And history. And the feeling that maybe the universe, or fate, or something in between, was drawing two roads back together. One producer, when asked what the locker room thought of Roman's sudden reappearance at the Performance Center, put it simply, he's not scouting talent. He's looking for something. Maybe someone. Meanwhile, in California, Seth had begun journaling. Quiet reflections scribbled between therapy appointments and family time. He wrote about pain. About the smell of the ring. The rhythm of the crowd. But mostly, he wrote about moments. Moments he regretted. Moments he missed. Moments he didn't realize meant everything until they were gone. There was one entry, shared privately with a confidant, that simply read, "We bled together. We broke together. We made magic. And then we let it all rot." Why? It was that question that lingered with him during a flight to Stamford. WWE had requested a medical evaluation from their own team, as part of the routine return-to-play protocol. Seth boarded the flight with Becky and their daughter, quietly dreading the entire process. Not because he feared bad news, but because he feared being forgotten. That maybe the world had moved on. That maybe his time had passed. But what he didn't expect was who would be waiting when he landed. Roman. Not in a suit. Not with a camera crew. Just Roman. Hoodie, sunglasses, arms folded. Standing outside the black SUV WWE had sent. When Seth stepped onto the tarmac, their eyes met. No words. Just a nod. That old nod. The kind you give a man you've bled with. The kind you give a brother you haven't seen in years. They drove in silence for a while. Becky sat with their daughter in the back, headphones on. Roman drove. Seth watched the highway pass in blurs. Then finally, Roman spoke. "You look smaller," he said with a smirk. Seth smirked back. "You look older." And just like that, the ice cracked. They didn't talk about the injury. They didn't talk about titles or betrayal or the years of rivalry. They talked about life. About kids. About the feeling of waking up and not knowing what city you're in. About the fans. About what it feels like to walk into an arena after months away and wonder if the cheers will still come. That night, they shared a private dinner in Roman's hotel suite. No entourage. No cameras. Just two men, once brothers, now slowly rebuilding the foundation of something far more real than storyline arcs. Roman poured them both a glass of whiskey, something he rarely did, and raised it silently. Seth clinked his glass, and for the first time since the injury, since the surgery, since the pain, he felt okay. Not whole. Not healed. But okay. "I thought you hated me," Seth said after a long pause. "I did," Roman replied. "But I hated myself more. For how it all ended. For how I let it go." Seth nodded. "Me too. That was all. That was enough." The next morning, they went their separate ways. Seth to his evaluation. Roman to a closed-door meeting with Hunter. But something had shifted. Something real. The kind of shift you don't advertise. The kind of shift you feel in the pit of your chest. Inside WWE headquarters, Seth passed his medical evaluation with cautious optimism. He was told he was 6 to 8 months from full clearance, but ahead of schedule. The therapists were impressed. The doctors surprised. The company? Delighted. Not just for business, but for the possibility. The possibility that when he returned, it wouldn't just be a comeback. It would be a convergence. Word began to spread quietly. That Roman and Seth were speaking again. That something, no one knew what, was brewing. Not in creative meetings. Not in storyline pitches. But in the spaces that mattered. In hearts. In history. In the unfinished sentences of their shared past. 1 week later, Seth posted a photo to Instagram. It wasn't dramatic. Just a simple shot of his knee brace resting on a pair of wrestling boots. The caption read, "Almost there." Roman liked the post within 10 minutes. No comment. Just a silent nod across the digital ether. And for the WWE universe, that was all it took. Speculation ran wild. YouTube theories. Twitter threads. Reddit conspiracies. Was the Shield reforming? Was a WrestleMania match being planned? Was this the beginning of something historic? But those close to both men know the truth. It's not about nostalgia. It's not about reuniting for the fans. It's about respect. Redemption. And something rare in professional wrestling, reconciliation. Because when you strip away the lights, the belts, the promos, and the pop, all that's left are the men who made the business what it is. And sometimes, those men find their way back to each other not because of the business, but in spite of it. Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins are not the same men who burst through the crowd a decade ago, hungry and untested. They're fathers now. Veterans. Survivors. And for the first time in years, they're standing on the same side of something again. Not a storyline. Not a faction. But a moment. A moment still forming. A moment that could define everything. It was the Monday night after Money in the Bank when something strange happened. Not on the show. Not in the ring. But backstage, after the cameras had faded and the pyrotechnics had cooled. A small group of production assistants were cleaning the hallway near the executive locker rooms when the door to Roman Reigns' private suite opened. And from it emerged something no one had expected to see. A quiet, private, one-on-one meeting between Roman Reigns and Triple H, followed minutes later by Roman sitting alone in the locker room, phone in hand, face unreadable. Insiders say he had just finished watching a video sent to him by Seth Rollins' team. It wasn't for the public. It wasn't edited with graphics or slow mo. It was raw footage, Seth walking without assistance. No brace. Just tape. Moving cautiously but confidently across a private rehab center mat in Tampa. No words were spoken in the clip. Just movement. And for Roman, that said everything. Backstage sources describe Roman's reaction as distant. Focused. Like a man not reacting, but planning. A close associate later said, he looked like he had just received a message he'd been waiting for. Not a challenge. Not a threat. But a signal. A quiet knock at a door that had been locked for too long. And the look on his face wasn't smug or satisfied. It was resolute. The same expression he wore years ago, standing over fallen opponents, only now, it came with weight. With time. With reflection. That same night, Rollins posted something that further stoked the fire. A black and white image, no caption, of his Shield vest. Torn. Folded. Covered in dust. It wasn't a statement. It was a whisper. One that traveled fast. Across timelines. Across screens. And straight into the speculation of the WWE Universe. Suddenly, fans weren't just asking when Seth would return. They were asking, to what? In the weeks that followed, both men began appearing in locations they hadn't visited in months. Roman was seen entering the WWE Performance Center during off hours. Seth, too, began working out in the ring, slowly, deliberately, testing pivots, practicing landings, cautiously exploring the boundaries of his recovering body. Trainers noted that Seth never spoke about return dates. Only return purpose. "I'm not just coming back to wrestle," he told one trainer. "I'm coming back to make something right." And maybe that's what Roman was waiting for. Not a moment. A mindset. Because for all their wars, all their betrayals, and all the scars they gave each other, emotional and otherwise, there was always one thing holding the story open like a wound that refused to heal. Neither of them had ever truly finished what they started. And now, both of them knew. The only way forward was through each other. One particular Friday night at SmackDown, Roman was seen standing in the shadows of gorilla position during a closing segment he wasn't booked for. He wasn't scheduled. He wasn't even dressed. Just standing, hoodie up, arms crossed, watching the screen as Cody Rhodes delivered a fiery promo about honor and legacy. When asked what he was doing there, Roman reportedly replied, "Just studying kings." The comment was cryptic. The intent, not. Meanwhile, Seth was quietly making arrangements for his return, not to WWE programming, but to Full Sail University, the same building where he first forged his reputation in NXT. It was there, in an empty ring on a quiet Wednesday night, that Rollins took his first unsupervised bump in over 3 months. He landed clean. No limp. No grimace. Just a slow exhale, as if letting go of something far heavier than pain. According to a coach who witnessed it, he whispered under his breath, "Still got it." But even as his body began to reawaken, Seth knew something else had changed. The crowds would cheer. The company would welcome him back. But none of that would matter unless he answered one question: what happens when you come back, but the man you used to be doesn't? The answer, it seemed, was waiting for him, in the eyes of the one man who'd always mirrored him, even when they hated each other. Roman and Seth weren't talking publicly. No joint promos. No scripted confrontations. But they were talking quietly. A call here. A message there. At one point, they even met at a secluded hotel in Orlando for a 3-hour private conversation, described by someone close to them as a reckoning. The details of what was said remain sealed. But one line reportedly echoed from that meeting: "Let's finish what we started." Not for the company. For us. WWE brass, initially unsure how to handle their renewed connection, has since begun to shift its tone. Leaks that once fueled rivalry angles have quieted. In their place, subtle gestures have emerged, highlight packages that include both men, promos that nod at the past without naming it, commentary that lingers a little longer on their legacies. There's a sense now that the company isn't just preparing for a match. It's preparing for a moment. And while SummerSlam 2025 will go on without Seth Rollins in the ring, it may still mark the beginning of something bigger than any main event. Rumors swirl of a closing segment, unscripted, unrehearsed, where Roman might walk into the ring, not to confront, but to call out. Not to provoke, but to invite. A gesture. A line in the sand. A message to the man he once called his brother: "I'm ready when you are." Whether Seth accepts that invitation at SummerSlam or waits for another stage, another city, another time, only he knows. But what's becoming increasingly clear is this: the final chapter between these two icons is no longer being written by creative teams or booking schedules. It's being written in private calls. In rehab sessions. In whispered apologies and unspoken respect. And maybe that's what makes it real. Because in the world of wrestling, where everything is scripted and every outcome predetermined, there are still moments that slip through the cracks. Moments where the past and present collide in ways no one can control. And sometimes, the most powerful story is the one no one planned. Just two men. Two warriors. Two fathers. Two champions. Finding their way back to each other, not for ratings. Not for belts. But for closure. Or maybe, for beginning again. It was the week before Survivor Series when the tension reached a quiet boiling point. Not on television, not in a pay-per-view match graphic, but in a hushed, candlelit dinner room on the outskirts of Tampa. Seth Rollins had invited Roman Reigns over, not as a champion, not as a rival, but as a man. The table was set, the kids were upstairs, and Becky had chosen to give them space. No cameras. No entourage. No scripts. Just two chairs. Two plates. And a decade of unresolved wait between them. What happened at that dinner would remain private. But fragments began to leak, not from malice, but from meaning. Sources close to both men said it wasn't a conversation of confrontation, but one of honesty. Apologies were exchanged, not for singular actions, but for years of distance. Seth reportedly looked Roman in the eye and said, "There were nights I hated you more than anyone in this business. But I never stopped respecting you." Roman, hand on his glass, responded, "I thought you wanted to replace me. Now I think, maybe you were trying to reach me." The meal ended with no declarations. No angles planned. Just a simple gesture. Roman placed his hand on Seth's shoulder and said, "If you want to do this, really do this, we don't need anyone else's permission." And for Seth, that was all he needed to hear. Backstage, WWE producers had already begun to brainstorm potential reunion angles. Some pitched a Shield one-off. Others imagined a WrestleMania redemption match. But quietly, Triple H made a decision that shocked even his most trusted creative lieutenants. He gave them full control. No scripts. No fake heat. "Just tell your story," he reportedly told Roman and Seth behind closed doors. "Tell it how you need to." And so they began to shape it, not in meetings, but in memories. They exchanged old photos. Videos. Stories. Laughed about the early days. The vans. The sleepless tours. The injuries. The moments that defined them. Slowly, a framework emerged, not of rivalry, but of reckoning. It wouldn't be about who was better. It wouldn't be about betrayal. It would be about truth. And above all, about brotherhood. In the days leading up to Survivor Series, WWE began to drop subtle breadcrumbs. A Shield theme softly teased over a backstage segment. A black vest spotted in a locker room. The camera lingering just a second longer on an empty chair beside Roman during a promo. Fans noticed. The internet exploded. And then, finally, the announcement came, delivered not by WWE, but by Roman himself, live on SmackDown. Standing in the center of the ring, Roman Reigns, no belt on his shoulder, no bloodline by his side, looked straight into the camera and said, "There's someone I need to see." Not as the head of the table, but as a brother. "Seth, if you're watching, you know where to find me." That was it. No music. No lights. Just silence. And anticipation. 3 nights later, during the final segment of Raw, Seth Rollins walked out. Not to a match. Not for a fight. Just a walk. Limp gone. Brace gone. Dressed in simple black. No gear. No ego. Just a man. The crowd roared. Chanted his name. But Seth didn't speak. He just stood at the top of the ramp and raised a single fist. Roman, watching from the production truck in Florida, reportedly closed his eyes and whispered, "It's time." In the days that followed, the announcement came, WrestleMania 41. Roman Reigns vs. Seth Rollins. One final time. Not for titles. Not for brand supremacy. For legacy. For closure. For everything left unsaid. But here's what made it different. They insisted on no run-ins. No factions. No screwjobs. Just the two of them, in the ring, under the lights, one last time. The match, they said, wasn't the point. The moment was. Two men who had survived it all, fame, betrayal, silence, surgery. Finally standing across from each other, not as enemies, but as echoes of everything they once were, and everything they could still be. Roman trained in silence. Seth trained in solitude. WWE documented none of it. There were no hype vignettes. No explosive packages. Just a still image released across all platforms, a shadowed Roman and Seth, face to face, with one word beneath them, reckoning. As WrestleMania approached, the buzz was deafening. Fans didn't know what to expect. A brawl? A hug? Both? But what they got was something even more rare in WWE, something real. The night came. The stadium was electric. Roman entered first, no pyro, no crown. Just Roman. Then came Seth. Also stripped down. Just boots, gloves, and a quiet fire in his eyes. The bell rang. What followed wasn't a match. It was a story. Told not through moves, but through moments. A pause before a punch. A glance before a clothesline. A hesitation before a stomp. For 27 minutes, they wrestled. Not each other, but their ghosts. At the end, both men collapsed in the ring, breathless. Roman extended his hand. Seth took it. They stood. And then, Roman pulled him into an embrace. The crowd rose. Not in applause. In respect. There was no heel turn. No betrayal. Just closure. After the match, WWE aired no recap. No victory promo. Just a single still, Roman and Seth, side by side, walking up the ramp together. And in that moment, it didn't matter who had won. The win was in the walk. And maybe that's what this story was always about. Not championships. Not legacy. But forgiveness. Because in the end, the greatest comeback wasn't in Seth's knee or Roman's return. It was in their ability to heal something deeper. A brotherhood reborn in silence. A rivalry buried in respect. And a match that no one wrote, because it had already been written. In the weeks that followed WrestleMania 41, the wrestling world was quieter. Not because of a lack of action, but because something sacred had just happened. Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins had shared a moment that didn't need endless replays or dramatized recaps. It lived beyond promos. Beyond tweets. Beyond the noise. It lived in that rarest of spaces, truth. But inside the walls of WWE headquarters, there was no silence. Executives gathered to discuss what had just taken place, not the match itself, but its aftermath. Because for the first time in years, a major WrestleMania main event ended not with a shocking betrayal, not with a lights-out ambush, but with an embrace. And the ripple effect was seismic. Young superstars reportedly watched the match together at the Performance Center. Afterward, some of them wept. One trainee, a former collegiate wrestler, said, "That was the first time I believed wrestling could heal something." Another, a second-generation talent, commented, "That wasn't just a match. That was a message." Because what Roman and Seth had done wasn't just settle a score, they reminded the world that even in a business built on conflict, peace was still possible. Back at home, Seth Rollins took time off, not just to rest his body, but to rest his soul. He returned to Tampa with Becky and their daughter, who, for the first time, saw her father on TV not covered in blood or holding a belt, but hugging a man who once betrayed him. Becky reportedly told friends, "This was the version of him I always hoped the world would see." Roman, meanwhile, returned to Pensacola. He didn't immediately return to Raw. He didn't tease another run. He simply disappeared. Not as a retreat, but as a man who had said what he needed to say. For over 3 years, he had ruled WWE as the most dominant force in modern history. But after WrestleMania 41, Roman Reigns walked away quietly, not in shame, not in defeat, but in fulfillment. There were rumors, of course, that he might retire, that he might take a permanent backstage role, that he might be building something new, behind the scenes. But Roman said nothing. He didn't need to. Because the last image he gave us, walking up the ramp with Seth Rollins, their silhouettes fading into the light, was the kind of exit few legends ever get. And perhaps that was intentional. But the echoes of their moment didn't stop with them. Fans across the world began revisiting old Shield clips, commentaries, documentaries. Some created tribute videos. Others wrote articles exploring the depth of their relationship. Hashtags trended. Reckoning became not just the name of their final encounter, but a movement, an idea that in a world obsessed with drama, sometimes redemption is the greatest story of all. And still, there were questions. Would they tag again? Would they stand side by side at Survivor Series? Would Dean Ambrose, Jon Moxley, ever return to complete the circle? But those were questions for another time. For now, the world allowed the dust to settle. Because what had happened didn't need to be followed. It needed to be remembered. Seth Rollins eventually sat down for one interview. Just one. No promotion. No WWE studio. Just him, in a chair, with the lights low. When asked what that night at WrestleMania meant to him, he paused. And then he said, "I've had titles. I've had moments. But I've never had peace, until that night. We weren't fighting for gold. We were fighting for closure. For understanding. For brotherhood. And when I hugged Roman, I knew we were finally free." He was asked one final question: would he ever face Roman again? Seth smiled. Maybe. But not to beat him. To remind him we never needed to. In a business that thrives on unfinished business, Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins did something radical. They finished it. Not with fire. Not with fury. But with grace. And so, as the chapter closed, the image remained, two brothers walking into the light. And behind them, silence, but not emptiness, peace. 6 months passed, and for 6 months, Roman Reigns remained silent. No interviews. No surprise appearances. No cryptic promos from dark rooms. Just, gone. The man who once ruled over WWE with an iron grip, whose every breath shaped title pictures and whose very presence dictated the pulse of every brand, vanished. But it wasn't absence born of anger or burnout. It was the kind of silence that follows resolution. Roman had found what few in the business ever truly touch: peace. And yet, peace in wrestling is never permanent. Not when the world keeps spinning. Not when the company keeps evolving. And not when your name still echoes louder than those who currently hold the crown. At WrestleMania 42's announcement conference, fans were given what seemed like a nostalgic surprise: an opening package narrating the evolution of brotherhood in WWE. Clips of the Shield played, slow, reverent. The chaos. The war. The betrayal. And then, the reckoning. Roman and Seth, standing tall together, one last time. It was the final image before the logo reveal. The crowd erupted. But it wasn't the nostalgia that gripped them, it was the suspicion. Because in wrestling, nothing is shown unless it means something. Behind the scenes, WWE's creative team was divided. Half believed the Roman-Seth story had reached its emotional peak at WrestleMania 41 and should remain untouched. The other half argued there was more to say. Not in conflict. But in continuation. A legacy match, not between enemies, but between brothers, against the world. And as talk swirled, as ideas flew, and as the industry looked for its next landmark moment, one call was placed. A call that would change everything. Not to Roman. Not to Seth. but to the man no one had dared speak of in years. Jon Moxley, once Dean Ambrose, now a wild card. A renegade. A man who had walked away from WWE with fire on his heels and rage in his eyes. But something about what Roman and Seth had done reached him. Quietly. Deeply. According to insiders at AEW, Moxley was handed a private video compilation, unedited footage of WrestleMania 41, the aftermath, and the silent embrace heard round the world. He watched it in his locker room, alone. And when it ended, he didn't speak. He stood. Walked to the window. And simply whispered, "About damn time." Phone calls followed. Conversations once thought impossible. No promises. No contracts. Just talks. And slowly, something impossible began to form. Because if Roman and Seth had found peace, then maybe, just maybe, so could he, and that's where the next story begins, not with fire, not with betrayal, but with a reunion forged in scars, three men. One history, a final mission, because sometimes, the only way to move forward is to come home. It started with a whisper. Not from an official source, not from a company announcement, but from the kind of leak that spreads like wildfire when something monumental is stirring beneath the surface. An unconfirmed sighting at an airport in Orlando. A man in a black hoodie, his face partially hidden, his gait familiar. "That's Mox," one fan posted. "I swear it's him." Most didn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. Because for years, Jon Moxley had been the one constant outsider. The defector. The man who had not only walked away from WWE, but set it ablaze on his way out. To imagine him near a WWE facility again, let alone in conversation with Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins, felt like fantasy. Like fiction. But then came the second photo. Grainy. Unofficial. A loading dock door. A shadow of a man shaking hands with someone much larger. And if you zoomed in close enough, just barely, you could see Roman Reigns' unmistakable profile. Unmistakable, and smiling. The internet exploded. Within hours, #Shield Resurrection began trending worldwide. And WWE? Silent. Not a confirmation. Not a denial. Just one cryptic video uploaded to social media. No caption. No voiceover. Just black and white footage of three pairs of boots, marching across a concrete floor. The clip cut before the faces were shown. The final frame? The old Shield logo. Cracked. But intact. And just like that, the game changed. Inside WWE's executive offices, the plan was already underway. Triple H had greenlit what many believed could never be done again. A limited, story-driven, emotionally authentic return of the Shield, not for dominance. Not for ego. But for legacy. One final mission. One last reckoning. But before it could be finalized, there had to be one more meeting. One that would either make or break the entire resurrection. And so, in a neutral location away from cameras, reporters, and the noise of the industry, three men sat at a table. Not Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and Dean Ambrose. But Joe, Colby, and John. Three men who had lived through wars, on screen and off. Who had lost brothers, lost trust, lost faith in a business that both built and broke them. What happened in that meeting was not recorded. But those close to the moment say it was not easy. Moxley, known for his brutal honesty, laid it bare. He talked about the rage. The betrayal. The way it felt to be left behind when the system used him up. Roman spoke next, not as a king, but as a man who knew what it meant to fall and be forgotten. And Seth? Seth sat silently for almost half an hour before finally saying, "We can't change what we were. But maybe we can choose what we become." And in that sentence, it began. What followed was not a press conference. Not a teaser trailer. But a whisper campaign unlike anything the WWE had orchestrated before. Real footage. Old footage. Shield house show moments never aired. The quiet ones. The ones where they laughed in parking lots, huddled together in broken-down rental cars, slept across 3 chairs backstage. WWE didn't manufacture a return. They peeled back the curtain. Let fans remember not just the faction, but the family. The official announcement came not in the form of a match, but a mission. The Shield, one last run. A 4-part arc across 4 premium live events. Not just matches, but moments. Each event would tell a chapter. And it would begin where it all started. Cleveland, Ohio. The same city where they debuted, crashed through the crowd, and changed wrestling forever. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. AEW issued a formal statement wishing Moxley power and peace. WWE veterans texted in disbelief. Fans began planning travel months in advance. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was history. The first night arrived. Cleveland was ready. The crowd packed to the rafters. The lights dimmed. And then? Sierra. Hotel. India. Echo. Lima. Delta. Shield. The pop was nuclear. But what stunned the crowd more wasn't just the return, it was the way they returned. Not as the old Shield. Not in riot gear. Not screaming into the camera. They came through the crowd, yes. But dressed in black hoodies. Street gear. Stripped down. Real. Moxley led. Roman followed. Seth brought up the rear. They stood in the center of the ring, 3 microphones in hand, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then Moxley spoke. We were never perfect. We broke each other. We lied to each other. We bled for something we didn't understand back then. But now? We get it. This, he said, tapping the mat, was never about domination. It was about surviving. And we did. Barely. But we did. And now, we finish it. Roman followed. I built an empire. I sat at the head of the table. But I never stopped looking at 2 empty chairs. And I'm tired of pretending I was enough on my own. Seth closed. The visionary. The architect. I saw every move, every twist, except this. I didn't see how much I needed this until I couldn't walk. And now I know, we were never meant to walk alone. They dropped their mics. Looked into the crowd. And raised their fists. Together. The Shield had returned. But not to reclaim, to restore, to finish.